All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at something pretty massive. Two dynamic middle powers in the Indo-Pacific, the Philippines and Vietnam, are literally rewriting the playbook for regional survival. Driven by shifting global supply chains and some really intense great power competition, these two nations formalized an enhanced strategic partnership on June 1, 2026. We're going to break down exactly how they pulled this off and why this specific agreement is sending shockwaves around the globe.
To really get why this is such a big deal, we got to look at the timeline. It started out with a foundational defense cooperation agreement back in 2010, which eventually evolved into a standard strategic partnership by 2015. But this jump to 2026, that is what's truly historic. It marks a huge qualitative leap. It formalizes a decade of trust building and actually makes Vietnam the Philippines' absolute sole strategic partner within the entire ASEAN bloc.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the volatile Indo-Pacific shift. Second, the architecture of the partnership. Third, uniting divergent defense doctrines. Fourth, recalibrating regional power balances. And finally, the global reactions.
Let's start with part one, a volatile Indo-Pacific shift. We have to start with the core problem driving this whole alignment, because you really can't understand this partnership without recognizing the environment they're in. This is a region dealing with incredibly fragile supply chains and rapidly escalating territorial disputes in the South China Sea. Manila and Hanoi have both heavily borne the brunt of what we call gray zone tactics. Basically, these are coercive asymmetric actions designed to deliberately fall just below the threshold of conventional armed conflict. In these contested waters, we're talking about the deployment of massive 2,000-ton Coast Guard vessels, the firing of water cannons, military-grade laser illumination, and even maritime militia swarms that are meant to harass local fishermen and block resupply missions.
Moving right along to part two, architecture of the partnership.
So the big question is, how exactly are they structuring their response to all this? Well, they're building an architecture made up of three interlocking pillars: defense, economy, and agriculture. And crucially, they are grounding this entire framework in strict international law. They're drawing a hard line in the sand, or, well, the water, saying freedom of navigation and overflight is completely non-negotiable. This partnership isn't just about military posturing. It explicitly roots its conflict resolution framework in things like the 1982 UNCLOS and the landmark 2016 South China Sea Arbitral Award. They're creating a unified legal counter-narrative.
And to back up that legal stance, the two nations have laid out a very clear four-step defense integration plan. Philippine Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro actually cited a more volatile environment as the direct catalyst for this. By setting up high-level security dialogues, boosting real-time intelligence sharing, conducting joint maritime operations, and expanding defense industry coordination, they're building a highly unified operational front. Look, if you want to defend your territory peacefully, you absolutely need to know exactly what is happening in the water at all times.
And this operational trust isn't just theory, it's already in action. Back in August 2024, they held these historic joint exercises right in Manila Bay. The Vietnamese Coast Guard sent a 2,400-ton ship to drill alongside the Philippines' BRP Gabriela Salong. Get this, they actually simulated firefighting using water cannons, which, if you think about it, is a highly symbolic and kind of ironic choice given that water cannons are regularly used as weapons of harassment against them out there. They also ran complex search and rescue protocols. It really proves they aren't just talking. They've successfully established direct hotlines and tactical interoperability to quickly de-escalate incidents before they spiral into an actual conflict.
Which brings us to part three, uniting divergent defense doctrines. Now, pulling this off politically required a massive diplomatic tightrope. Seriously, it's fascinating. On one side, you've got the Philippines' forward-leaning, comprehensive archipelagic defense concept, where Manila is actively integrating its security with explicit external treaty allies like the US, Japan, and Australia. But on the other side, you have Vietnam's famous Four No's policy. Hanoi mandates strict non-alignment. They explicitly prohibit military alliances or siding with one country against another. So how do they make it work? They've masterfully harmonized these completely divergent doctrines by focusing entirely on practical, non-aligned collaboration, things like Coast Guard drills and cybersecurity, without ever crossing the line into a formal mutual defense treaty.
All right, part four, recalibrating regional power balances. Because let's be real, a modern partnership in the 21st century relies just as much on markets and economic statecraft as it does on maritime security. The two governments have formally committed to expanding bilateral trade well beyond their $10 billion target. And it's not just about raw volume either. They are deliberately pivoting toward a sustainable blue economy, green tech, and advanced manufacturing. The goal here is to shield their economic growth from future global supply chain disruptions.
A massive piece of that economic shield is actually digital. The partnership includes a comprehensive information technology and digital transformation MOU. This creates a unified front to accelerate intelligence sharing against severe regional threats like cross-border internet fraud, cyber scams, and human trafficking networks. This whole modernization effort really proves that in today's landscape, cybersecurity is completely inextricable from national security.
But hey, economic security also means food security, right? The Philippines is one of the world's largest importers of rice, and Vietnam is a premier global exporter. To insulate themselves from global supply chain shocks and climate events like El Niño, Vietnam has bindingly committed to supplying the Philippines with up to 1.5 million tons of rice every single year through 2027. That is massive for stability.
And the empirical data shows this long-term rice trade mechanism is already working flawlessly. In just the first 2 months of 2026 alone, Vietnam exported over 711,000 tons of rice to the Philippines. That is a massive 30% year-over-year increase. By ensuring their citizens have stable, affordable food, they are directly bulletproofing their economies against external pressures.
Finally, Part 5, Global Reactions and Anxieties.
So, how's the rest of the world taking this? Well, reactions are pretty fractured. The U.S. views this highly favorably, seeing it as validation for a modern, lattice-work model of security, moving away from those old U.S.-centric hub-and-spoke alliances. ASEAN, on the other hand, is generally positive about the economic resilience this brings, but they're closely monitoring it out of fear that highly formalized security integration could create a bloc within a bloc that disrupts their consensus-driven unity. And China's official stance pushes for bilateral talks only, harboring underlying strategic anxieties about potential encirclement by external forces.
To really understand Beijing's response, you have to look at their highly pragmatic dual-track strategy. On one hand, official diplomatic channels are maintaining a measured tone. On the other hand, state media is aggressively warning against militarization and external forces. But critically, and this is the pragmatic part, Beijing continued to authorize massive, vital diesel and fuel shipments to both the Philippines and Vietnam in early 2026, even amid their own internal export curbs. It's a really careful balancing act between asserting maritime claims and maintaining crucial economic leverage.
Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating reality to ponder. Through strategic autonomy and networking their capabilities, nations like the Philippines and Vietnam are practicing advanced middle power hedging. They're no longer just passive pawns in superpower competition. So the question is, by actively shaping the behavior of those superpowers, are these middle powers actually becoming the true architects of the 21st century geopolitical chessboard?